I don't know how to follow that. So I'm not going to try to. I'm going to break trend, actually. I'm not going to talk about refugees, about traffickers. I'm not going to talk about the amazing work that everyone does. I wish now that I had planned to do that, but it's a bit late now. So I'm actually going to bring it back and talk about the lawyers that we work with, the lawyers that we want to work with, the lawyers that we want to do more pro bono. And what I'm going to do is talk about the things that I have in my, what I call my persuasion toolbox. What I talk about when I go and talk to our lawyers, both in DLA and other lawyers, about why they should do pro bono. And obviously, you know, I do talk about the moral obligation of lawyers to do pro bono. I think everyone here knows in their hearts why they do pro bono. We're all sort of cut from the same cloth, so we know that, and I won't talk about that today. I also talk about the efficiency aspect, maximising the impact of a busy lawyer's time, using their sort of skills and unique skills and expertise, but I won't go into that. What I really wanted to talk about today is an element of what we tend to call the business case for pro bono, but it's a very specific element of it. And one partner once said to me, Amy, in the legal world, you know, there's no such thing as a free lunch. We do pro bono because it's good for the world, but also because it's good for our business. And, you know, at the time I was a little bit surprised at it, but actually I don't think we need to be ashamed of the benefits that pro bono give law firms and the lawyers that do pro bono. I think the beauty of the pro bono model is that it's a benefit not just for the communities where we work, but also for the lawyers that do pro bono and the law firms that support them in doing so. I think it makes the pro bono model not only successful, but sustainable and also scalable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the psychological benefits of pro bono to lawyers. And mainly, I've got a hypothesis that I want to prove today, that pro bono actually makes happier lawyers that are more productive, that stay at law firms longer, and the flow-on commercial effects of that for law firms are that they have a lower personnel cost, higher retention, and more productive lawyers. And I see a lot of people nodding in the room. You're probably thinking, well, Captain Obvious, thanks. You know, why are you talking to me for another 10 minutes about this? I see it every day. And, you know, there's not a lot of research in this area, actually. There's not a lot of links that you can really use to, I mean, we know that that's the case, but how do we know? There's not a lot of research on there. So I'm going to just talk about the research that's out there and how we can put that in our persuasion toolbox and talk about it to lawyers and to law firms. And the reason why I'm up here today, I manage the UK pro bono practice for DLA Piper, but I did a psychology degree as well as a law degree back in Australia. I'm really interested in the links between law and psychology, of which there are many. And this is a really important topic, I think, and a really interesting one. So, to prove my hypothesis today, we're going to have to go into the minds of a corporate commercial lawyer, which can be a very exciting thing, but also sometimes a little bit of a worrying thing as well. And I just want to do some audience participation. Do you want to shout out just 3 of the top psychological traits that you think a typical commercial corporate lawyer that we work with on a day-to-day basis, what kind of traits come to mind when you think of them? Anyone? Stressed? True. Sorry? Risk averse, that's a very good one. Anyone? Good looking? Yeah, that's also true. That's also true. Well, actually, so research has shown that the typical lawyer is actually really a type A personality. So they're highly competitive, they're highly ambitious, they have a tendency towards perfectionism, both in their work life but also their personal life as well. They're really task-orientated, so they're not versus relationship-orientated, and often they're at times quite low on interpersonal sensitivity. And if they do have it, then often it's learnt over many years rather than that it comes naturally to them. They really like to have high levels of autonomy. So they like to have control over themselves, over their time, over what they do, which I'll talk about later is quite difficult in a law firm. They're very analytical. They have a high level of critical thinking, and often they're quite critical in their nature, both critical of themselves and of their loved ones, as well as at work. And they're really, really skeptical. The highest levels of skepticism, actually, in the whole population are in lawyers. And so all of these traits, actually, sort of band together. It sounds quite negative, really, a negative set of traits. But if you think about what lawyers do on a day-to-day basis and how we're trained to think at law school, it actually makes a lot of sense. It's quite functional. Lawyers are meant to constantly think about what's going to go wrong in a contract or a deal. They're constantly asking whether what people are saying, what their motives are behind it, whether they're not saying everything that they should be. They're constantly trying to protect their client by thinking of what's going to go wrong. So it does make sense. And it's interesting because, as everyone would know, personality traits are not just, it's a mixture of genes, so a mixture of nature and nurture, so genes and learned behaviours, which is interesting in the lawyer context. So research has shown that people that have that personality trait to begin with, they're more likely to want to study law. Then when they're at law school, they're more likely to succeed. There's a study that has come out really recently looking at optimistic versus pessimistic law students. And interestingly, the pessimistic law students do far better in general at law school than optimistic law students. And that doesn't happen in any other profession. So it's really interesting. More people go to law school with those traits. Those people with those traits stay at law school, they succeed, they get jobs. And then skepticism actually is one of the traits that is more influenced by environment than genes. So even if you come into the firm not really having the trait of skepticism, because there are so many people around you, within a few years, if you weren't skeptical to begin with, you're skeptical now. So it's really interesting. Now, as I said before, some of those traits are really functional, they make sense. But there are a few problems with it. So lawyers now, the traditional sort of model of lawyers in the back room looking at files, that doesn't really happen so much anymore. Lawyers are asked to really do a number of things in their roles. They're asked to have what psychologists call personality agility. And a lot of law firms now have on their branding, our lawyers think outside the box. Our lawyers, can talk to you about business strategy. They have business acumen. We ask lawyers to go out and do client development activities. And then as they rise up through the firms, we ask them not just to be lawyers, but to be managers and supervisors and mentors. We ask them to be on committee chairs. We ask them to, champion our pro bono program. So they really need this personality agility, but actually lawyers are not very good at doing that. And their traits don't neatly fit into those traits that are needed for that. So that's the first problem. The second problem is the mental health issue problem, and that's a big one. It really is. So there's a lot of studies that have come out about our lawyers at the commercial law firms and how they're feeling. And I guess if you combine those traits with what practicing law is really like, it's a recipe for disaster. So although Suits and The Good Wife might tell us that practicing law is amazing and wonderful and really glamorous, actually we know that that's not the case. It's hard, it's long hours, it's hard work, it's a lot of business demands. It's a hyper-competitive environment for people that already are hyper-competitive. Often, particularly for junior lawyers, they have a lack of control over their time and what they do. And as we know, lawyers like to be autonomous, they like control, so that's a really big issue for them. They're not just lacking control over their time, but also over what they do. A supervising partner tells you how to spend your day. And often there's a quote that a lawyer once told me when I was doing my thesis on pro bono. She said that lawyers in private firms do things that they are not very proud of. Everyone rationalizes it, but at the end of the day, many of us feel like my younger me wouldn't have recognized me. So, I mean, it is really a formula for a psychological crisis. And the studies also confirm that. So, universal studies on happiness show, on general, if you're not living in a war zone, if you're not living on the street, if you don't have extreme physical pain, then you're likely to rate your happiness at a level of, say, 7 to 10. 7 out of 10, sorry. So it's just an average level of happiness. That's what most people would rate their lives. Lawyers, not so much. Lawyers rate their happiness on a much lower scale, sort of at the same scale as butlers or housemaids or people of really low income service level jobs, even though most of lawyers, as we know, have quite high level, quite prestigious jobs. So then, if we talk about depression, so depression is a qualitatively different thing than unhappiness or low mood, but they often correlate with each other, and that's the same for lawyers. So depression, lawyers are 3.6 more likely to report being depressed. 1 in 5 lawyers at any one time is suffering from substance or alcohol sort of abuse issues. And even when it gets to sort of the suicide risk, lawyers are actually 6 times more likely than the general population to commit suicide. So it's a really dire issue. Dire. Sorry, that wasn't meant to be in that. What is the good news? Anyway, so what's the answer to this issue? Well, I think it's pro bono. So why is that? A recent study to come out of the US looked at lawyers that are in what they call public service type lawyerly jobs, so work for a legal aid type organisation or for many of the organisations that you work for here, versus lawyers that work in corporate firms. And they again found that those lawyers in corporate firms, although they had higher paying jobs, they had higher levels of prestige, they reported far lower measures of happiness than those in sort of public service jobs. And so what the researchers sort of extrapolated from that is that a happy lawyer needs work that is meaningful to them. It doesn't matter how much really they get paid. It doesn't really matter how prestigious the law firm is that they work in. It's really that they have a meaningful job that they're giving back in some way to society. So there's actually no research that has been done yet, I would love to do it, on pro bono itself, but you can really tell from the studies that if you take pro bono is the best way of helping a corporate lawyer or corporate commercial lawyer do this kind of meaningful work that obviously makes lawyers happier with life and with their work. And there is a buzzword that has come out of all of this research, and it's psychological sustenance. It's a great word, psychological sustenance. And really what that means is that pro bono is giving lawyers an opportunity to really connect on a social and personal level with issues that they feel strongly about. And often in law firms it's quite hard to find that, except for in pro bono. Lawyers report that pro bono makes them feel more connected to their workplace, to their colleagues, to their identity as a lawyer, why they studied law in the first place. And so it really makes sense that pro bono can give that higher life and work satisfaction. Pro bono also gives a higher, what we call decision latitude. So we talked about earlier how lawyers actually like to have autonomy. Most junior lawyers don't have autonomy. And so this is a way, most pro bono matters, it gives them a choice. It gives them a choice of how they will spend their time. Often they're not as closely monitored in pro bono work as they are in usual billable work. So it gives them that decision latitude back, which is really important. Another thing that I want to talk about is the personality agility issue. So we talked about before that actually the roles that lawyers play now are not as straightforward as they once was. They need a lot of personality traits that they might not necessarily have or be reinforced in their commercial work. And pro bono, a lot of pro bono, obviously you need the same critical thinking in pro bono matters as you do in commercial matters. But often you also need to be creative. You need to trust people, you need to be approachable, and you also need leadership, as I mentioned before. And those kind of traits, pro bono can give a lawyer the chance to develop. So why would law firm managers care about this? What's the issue in terms of the business case? Well, we can link it to both retention and productivity. So in terms of retention, you've all heard of the churn and burn of law firms. So junior associates come in and they come out. The latest statistics say that 77% of associates will leave their law firm within 5 years. And in any 1 year, a law firm loses a fifth of their associates, and they're quite conservative numbers. It's probably a lot higher than that. So it's actually this churn and burn, losing lawyers at a rapid rate, is the single biggest non-productive personnel cost to a law firm. So it's massive. Law firms are hemorrhaging young lawyers and money. So that's why they care. And, you know, to replace an associate, actually, they estimate it costs between 1.5 and 2 years' worth of salary of an associate. So it's a lot. We're talking about a lot of money. In terms of productivity, I mean, productivity is a big issue in the law firm world at the moment. Law firms are trying to cut costs. They're trying to be more efficient. And studies have shown that lawyers actually are not that productive when it comes to, compared to other professions. They're not that efficient, they're not that productive. And that could be for a number of reasons. But I think one of them actually is because the low mood and depression and the general mental health well-being that I spoke about before. And why do I think that? I think that because studies have shown a clear link between productivity and happiness. It's now been completely proven in the psychological world. We're just waiting for business to catch up. The latest study that has come out of the Journal of Labour and Economics has said that happier workers are 12% more productive. And that's a really low estimation compared to other reports. So there's definitely a link. So happier people are more likely to receive better work evaluations. They're less likely to call in sick. They set higher goals. They also persist longer at tricky cognitive questions, the tricky cognitive questions that lawyers face every day. They're better negotiators. They're better managers. And, you know, this all makes sense because when you're depressed or when you're in a low mood, you have low energy, you have less motivation, less commitment to your task. So it all really makes sense. And I know that we're running out of time, so I just want to really wrap up by saying there's not as many studies out there as I would have liked, but hopefully I've been able to create the link between happier lawyers, more productive lawyers, lawyers that have traits that can help them with all the different roles that they have to play in a law firm and how pro bono can really help with that. And I think if we talk about retention and productivity relating to pro bono and put that in our what we call a negotiation toolbox, I think it can be really helpful when you're talking to firm management and trying to get their investment into a pro bono program. And hopefully you've learnt a little bit today about psychology and pro bono. So thank you.